All right. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today on this great, wonderful webinar. I just want to do a quick panel introduction. So we have Zane Webster. He received his Master's of Science in Agriculture Education at the University of Arizona, where he's also worked as the head livestock judging coach. He currently works as a 4-H extension agent in San Juan County, New Mexico, where he enjoys working with the youth. Our second panelist is Naylene Doyle. She is a longtime resident of San Juan County. She received her master's degree in radiologic science from Weber State University. She was raised in the livestock industry, showing all across the nation, and now raises club lambs for Doyle Club Lambs. And then our other panelist and leading this webinar is Matthew Tenetclaw. He can go ahead and do an introduction now.
All right, well, good afternoon, everyone. Hey, thank you all for joining us. We certainly appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedules to join us right here on this webinar. We know there's a lot of them happening, and we're just, tickled pink and honored to have you, again with us today. Again, my name is Matthew Tenetclaw. I'm born and raised in Shiprock, New Mexico, and that's where I currently reside. I work for the InterTribal Agriculture Council as a technical assistant specialist. And my job is to assist producers of all ages, define their goals and help them reach their goals. So, and that's pretty much it in a nutshell. Anything that you need in terms of our organization's assistance, please don't hesitate to contact myself. If I'm not the expert, there's certainly some folks on our staff who will be more than happy to, assist you as well. So, with that being said, let's go ahead and get started. If we go ahead and roll on to the next slide. When it comes to show lamb selection, and a lot of this is just simply what I consider the tip of the iceberg. It's one component that you have to get right when it comes to achieving your goals. And if you go and roll on to the next slide, you'll begin to see that a lot of those things kind of relate and work together, when it comes to having the results in terms of success. That's what everybody will see. And as you can see, below the surface, there's a lot of things that have to go right for you in order to see those results. And I think no matter which way you look at it, the thing that I really stress for myself, or from my perspective, is support. You have to have support from your family, your moms and dads, everyone around you to build a great team that's going to help you achieve those goals. And I cannot stress that enough. If there's any leg of a chair that you need to absolutely have, that is it. And as we kind of roll forward with the next slide, we'll kind of begin to kind of do a quick and dirty example of what we're looking at in these sheep. So this is a picture from the last grand drive for the Market Lamb Show at the National Western Stock Show. And as you can see, each and every single one of these sheep are absolutely immaculate and impeccable in the way they're built. And if you roll on to the next slide, what I want you to envision in these sheep is, oh, there should be another one before that. Nope. There we go. The bodybuilder. All right. That's exactly how we want these sheep put together. And that is to be a bodybuilder, okay, when it comes to how these things are put together and what we hope that these sheep will, turn out to be. But as you are well aware, bodybuilders are not born, they're made. So as far as that sort of line of thought is concerned, another thing that we want to emphasize in the next slide is to show that these sheep also have to be very athletic. Okay, so as you very well know and understand, a bodybuilder won't win a marathon, and at the same time a sheep that is extremely stout still has to be able to move and still has to have some functionality in terms of structural correctness. So with that being said, let's roll on to the next slide. When it comes to seeking the ideal show lamb, it's up to you. You know, there's, you know, the trend of market lambs is always constantly changing, you know, from one extreme to the other. And no matter what the trend may be, I always encourage you to find something that's pretty close to the middle as possible. And as long as, you know, you develop the mentality or the philosophy to select sheep that are your type and your kind, I feel like you will never, ever, ever regret not picking out and sorting sheep that, you know, wouldn't be your type and kind, meaning that, you know, at the end of the day, you're glad, you know, you can appreciate the fact that you were beat, but you were beat using sheep that you like. And I think Zane will also, you know, can jump in here and start to, you know, give his idea of what he thinks of when it comes to selecting these market lambs.
Yes, Matt. And again, thank you for letting me hop on here and kind of be a part of this. I think it's really, really cool. With that being said, I think you've hit the nail on the head. I mean, multiple times. We want them to be that kind of bodybuilder type of sheep, but at the same time, if they're not athletic, if they can't move, if they're not mobile and functional, then really that muscle and that extra power just has no value besides hanging up in the cooler. We want them to have all that extra muscle. We want them to have that bodybuilder mass and the power and that optimal amount of finish. But at the same time, they got to be good in their shoulder. They got to be good in their spine. They got to be good in their hip and hind leg. If the heaviest muscled sheep won every show, then, you know, the livestock industry wouldn't be very fun, because, you know, we just get the measuring tape out and start measuring which one has the biggest top and which one has the biggest behind. There's so much more to that. And like you said, functionality, how they're built, and their skeleton is just very, very important in these sheep, especially in 2020.
Okay, thank you so much for that, Zane. So are there any questions up to this point? Let's check our question and answering area.
Not yet.
Nothing yet. Okay, let's go to the next slide. So on this next slide, I think is a really good place to start when it comes to sorting out these sheep. And the main thing is we have to have our goals in mind. So whether your fair is in the early fall, the late fall, the spring, the summer, whatever it may be, we have to have a goal when it comes to selecting a prospect that's going to help us achieve that goal. Zane, why don't you go ahead and fill us in here?
I think that's a really good point, because I think one of our selection criteria, when I kind of get into that, is growth, and kind of knowing what the targeted show for each sheep is going to be and how you feed that one. So if you do have a smaller frame sheep whose cannon bone isn't very long, he's not super extended, he might be really, really good. But, you know, if he showed from, you know, 10 months to a year old, he's not going to look his best. And there's those sheep that are kind of lanky and long and extended. You know, if they're shown at 8 months old or 7 months old, they're not going to look their best. So there's really growth and patterns that you got to follow. And what I like to say is good ones come in every shape and size, but at the same time, we don't feed good ones of every shape and size the same. So there's a lot of different things that go into that. And so when you're selecting these sheep, you got to recognize your goal and where you're showing this lamb. If you're selecting a lamb right now for state fair, and you pick one that's real long and lanky, super good sheep, but he's not going to look his best until December, then maybe that's not the perfect sheep that you need for your targeted show. Now, if you have a sheep who's really stout and stocky and you're trying to show him at the end of July, maybe that's the sheep that you need to show, because you know that that sheep's going to be able to put on that mass and still have that optimal amount of finish and, you know, end result in power that's going to work for the show that you're targeting that livestock to. So yeah, Matthew, you hit the nail on the head right there again. You got to set that goal and know exactly what you're wanting to do with these sheep. because if you just go out and, just cover your eyes and start throwing darts around, and just get random sheep, it's really not that good just to do that, because you need to know exactly what you're looking for before you go and look, so that you can have that optimal opportunity to put this sheep on the right feed, right targeted show, and in the end, it's just going to help you with your project to be that much more successful.
Great. Thank you for filling us in on that, Zane. I hope everyone's taking plenty of notes. So let's change gears a little bit. So now let's go ahead and kind of switch things up. So you as an exhibitor, you have your adequate good facilities put together. You've traveled to wherever you need to travel. Now you're at the show lamb barn. So you get to meet the breeder, and once you meet the person who's selling you these sheep, I think one conversation that might often get overlooked is, the genotype, and discussing genotypes. So as we kind of begin to, make our way along those lines, Zane, let's talk about some things that we want to know from the person who's selling us these sheep.
Yeah, that's a really, really important trait to talk about. There's a lot of those sheep that just based off of, who the sire was and this and that, the buck that bred them, they might be a late bloomer. They might be a sheep that, gets a little bit too stout at the end, and you might need to be worried about their shoulder getting a shot too big or things like that. Study up on your sires and on the bucks and everything like that, and the sheep that win. If you see the sheep that win at your county fair, or from Doyle's or this and that, ask them, how do those sheep perform each year? And do they look better at 80 pounds? Is that where they start looking good? Or they really hit their max and they're full stride at 120 pounds? That's really, really big in this sheep industry too. And then especially for you guys buying ewes, to show and then throw back into your herd, you need to know their blood work as well, to what ram to take them to, if they're a carrier for different genetic faults that could be passed on to your herd. You need to know those things, so that when you're selling these projects to other youth exhibitors that might raise them for breeding projects, that you're putting out the best information for them to have the utmost success in their project.
All right, thank you, Zane. So without any further ado, let's turn this camera of mine around and let's get to looking at some live sheep. Okay, so we have a sheep here on the stand, and without going any further, does that look good to everybody? Can you all see that pretty well?
Looks good.
Okay, so we have a sheep here on the stand, and I believe, for the most part, everybody that's anybody will immediately recognize sheep from the side view profile. So as we begin to evaluate this one, I prefer to look at them from the ground up. Zane, how do you like to look at them?
I agree. I think sheep, a lot of people want to just, look at how massive they are first, or are they level topped? I totally agree. Start from the ground up like you do with cattle or hogs or anything else. I think that's the best way to do it.
There we go. So as we begin to look at these sheep from the ground up, number one, we have the hooves there. We want to make sure these things are good footed. They're not too long in their toes at such an early age. From there, as you kind of work your way up, you begin to study those pasterns. And from that, studying the angle of the pasterns is something I feel like is pretty important. We don't want these things to be too straight. We don't want these things to, at the same time, be too relaxed. With that being said, there are some, opposite ends of the extreme that I'd like to kind of bring forward. When these things get extremely straight from the ground up, meaning that their angles are not, completely there, you will, begin to toe out, from the front and the back side. When these things get too too straight, their toes will point in. And the term for that is these sheep being pigeon-toed. And on the other end of that extreme, when they begin to be too relaxed in terms of their pastern and their angles, then they'll immediately begin to toe out, and their hocks will kind of come together, and we begin to recognize some of those issues. So as far as which is worse, for me, I tend to think that these things being too straight would certainly be a bigger issue than those that maybe just a tick too relaxed. What do you say, Zane?
I totally agree. I've always brought up the point, you know, you look at a deer, and a deer is one of the fastest animals in the world, and they have too much set to their hind leg. And so they still have that athleticism. So, you know, although it's not maybe, you know, as aesthetically pleasing to look at, it's still a shot more functional than actually being too straight. So I think it, you know, try to find that animal that meets right there in the middle, that has that perfect set to their shoulder and their hind leg, and then square from front and behind. But again, I think if you were going to kind of get a little bit iffy on one, it's better for them to turn out just a little bit, or their hocks to come in just a shot rather than bow out or be pigeon-toed or too straight.
Very good. So we're going to go ahead and kind of take a look at this one now from a different view as we begin to kind of bring this one forward. And as you can see, we're going to go ahead and get this sheep set up, you know, to the best of his ability for right now. And of course, this one is nervous. He's up on the stand. He's not used to being up on the stand like that. So he'll definitely, you know, be pretty tight in terms of his joints just because of that, you know, just because of this new environment that he's in. But as you can see, studying this one from the ground up, you know, his hocks want to come in just a tick. Personally, for me, I wouldn't study structure on these sheep by just looking at them on a stand like this, but this is the best way for us to get the best view. I'd actually rather turn these things loose and watch them go in a larger space. But again, as we kind of work our way back around here, come on, camera. We have this little camera that's supposed to have its own little remote, and for some reason it's not wanting to move for us. There we go. Okay, so now we're looking at this lamb from the front view. And again, as far as, you know, from the ground up, we begin to see this one kind of toes out there ever so slightly. Is it the end of the world? Absolutely not, because as we begin to study this one, you know, from the remaining angles, we can see that, especially right here on the shoulder, from the top of their shoulder down to the point, there's that really nice angles, you know, that we'd like to see in this one. We begin to kind of study them over here from their hip. We kind of see that, you know, that levelness here right down the top here to the end of their, you know, to the back side of their hip. You know, that's something that we really like to see. Overall, we kind of study that entire length of the spine. These longer body deals are, you know, something that we certainly desire in the show lambs, you know, just due to the fact that the longer the body is, the more, you know, value we can add to this lamb in terms of total pounds of red meat. From there, we kind of look at that head and neck. We want to make sure that this neck is joining nice and high right up here into the shoulder. Some sheep tend to attach a lot lower there into their shoulder. We consider that, you know, one to be fairly U-neck. Even kind of looking at their face here, we want to take a look at that jaw, making sure that jaw's coming together nicely. We don't want them to be parrot mouth or monkey mouth. Zane, would you like to fill us in on what those two things are?
Yeah, for sure. So parrot mouth and monkey mouth are something to be looking for. Not the end of the world. It's just something that could affect the way they eat and how much they do. But I know there's a lot of really good livestock across the country that are either or. So probably the more frequent one that you're going to see is parrot mouth, and it's fairly self-explanatory. It's when that upper portion of the jaw is about an inch or two longer than the lower portion. With that being said, it just kind of reaches just a little bit too much over that bottom jaw. So it kind of looks like a parrot's beak. This is just a genetic trait on things that happen with sheep. Some negative results of that is sometimes they're not able to eat as much or be as competitive on feed, and maybe eat a little bit slower. And then the opposite of that is monkey jawed, where it's the total flip side of that, where their bottom jaw sticks out just a little bit more, kind of having an underbite. With that being said, both of them can result in a sheep not eating quite as fast or as competitively. But in the end, I think if it's not that bad, it's really not the end of the world. Just something to be cognizant of when you're purchasing these livestock projects. And if you don't mind, Matt, I think I wanted to hop in just a little bit. You brought up something that I thought was really, really good. You said don't judge them when they're just standing on the stand or braced. I think that's, the understatement of the year for picking out sheep. I think, when you're picking these sheep out, let them loose out to a pen and see how their spine works on the move. See how, are they level on the go? Or are they just level when they're braced? Are their shoulders good when you have their neck picked up and their belly picked up in them? Or are their shoulder good also on the move? I think in 2020, we have so many judges out there that are putting their importance on skeletal quality in these sheep, how they move and how they're put together. But that being said, we got to make sure that they're also good balance stuck, but more importantly, they're also maintaining that balance on the move. So let those sheep go, let them move out and kind of get behind them, get in front of them, get on the side of them, and let those sheep just be natural. And I think the good ones are going to rise to the top if you do that.
Hey, very well stated, Zane. So as we begin to evaluate this one here, once again on the stand, you brought up another term that we often don't hear enough of, which is balance. So what are some indicators of balance when looking at this lamb?
So balance in sheep, I think a lot of people that maybe aren't as familiar with the sheep industry, it might scare them just a little bit. But I think sheep are maybe one of the easier things to kind of describe. And I think kind of the elementary school way of doing that is almost put them into triangles. So we want their shoulder and their front end to be smooth and shallow. A lot of people look at a sheep and they say, oh my gosh, he's so deep, he's so massive. We want that rib, we want that roundness, but we want their chest picked up in them like this sheep is right here. He's very, very massive. He's bold in his rib. He's got a lot of middle and a lot of flank. But if you see his chest sits higher than his middle and his flank, he's still smooth in his shoulder. And like you said, that neck attachment should sit right on the top of his shoulder. If that sheep's neck looks like it's almost placed in front of its shoulder or below its shoulder, that's not ideal. An ideal sheep, and that's a lot of times when I talk about selection, I think we need to compare to the ideal. We're never going to find a perfect one, but I think we should compare to that one. And we want those sheep to have that neck that almost looks like it just pops straight out of that shoulder. Also, when we're kind of working down that animal, we want that spine and top line to be level. We want that hip and hind leg to be square and have that perfect set to that hind leg. I talk a lot about skeletal quality and structure. I think structure and balance really go hand in hand, because I think if one's too straight and bad structured, they're really not going to be good balanced, because their shoulder and neck attachment's going to be wrong and their hip and hind leg is going to be off. Now, if they have that right set to their hind leg and the right set to their shoulder, that neck attachment's going to be good. That shoulder is more than likely going to be smooth, and that hip and hind leg is just going to blend a heck of a lot smoother into a more overall package. So for me, and that's kind of where I place my emphasis, is that skeletal quality really goes into balance. So make sure they're good structured, they have those right angles, and then I think the balance and overall look is going to follow suit.
Very good, very good. So now that we've kind of begun to evaluate this one here from the side view, let's go to another view that I think is just, I believe is what we consider the rear view. So as we begin to evaluate this sheep here on the rear view, as far as, capturing some of the, quality traits that this one possesses, again, from the ground up, we want these things to be nice and wide, but again, we want them to be smooth. We want them to be balanced. So what are some things that we can, pick apart on the sheep to consider him, to be a wide constructed, wide based, wide, skeleton sheep?
So I think if I was just to walk into the barn, this one's going to stand out because he is wide, wide, wide. He's massive every which way. But I think more importantly, Matt, if you kind of get over his top just a little bit, he's narrower at his shoulders and progressively thickens back to his hip. Do you guys see that? How he's wide in his chest. We saw his chest width, but he still has that progressive thickness back to his hips. That's the look that we're looking for up high. If they're wider in their front end or wider in their middle than their hind end, that's not ideal. We want them to have that pin set and that width from behind wider than anywhere in their body. What I like to say always is that, this kind of goes back to the balance and whatnot, is that you can feed muscle and fat, but you can't feed structure and balance. With that being said, I'm not saying go pick the skinny one and narrow one that's really good looking, but we want them to have this muscle. Muscle's our most important trait when they're fat and finished at our fair. Secondly, we want them to have the optimal amount of finish. But if you go to a big fair, there's going to be, a dozen, 2 dozen sheep there that have more than enough muscle. Beyond that, we got to make sure they're square from behind, they have that progressive thickness, and then they're also good in their skeleton. Luckily, this one right here is a great example of having a good structured sheep who also has way, way, way amounts of muscle. So this one's awfully good. Matt?
Great, thanks, Zane. So what we're going to do now is we're going to bring up another sheep that we would consider one for those who may be on a budget, because obviously, good sheep ain't cheap, but on the other hand, cheap ain't good. But, again, when we start to consider what we're doing with these things, in terms of our goals, some of these shows we go to may not exactly pan out to the level that, some others may be wanting to go through. So what we're going to do again is we're going to bring up something here that's going to be in the lower price range. And Zane, as we begin to throw some numbers around, I mean, wouldn't you agree, around that $500 range is about where many quality show lambs will start?
Yeah, I think so. And I think a lot of you guys that are purchasing livestock, sometimes they have a $1,200 lamb there that isn't the best one. And sometimes those $500 to $800 sheep, they're skinny and green, but they're ones that could be good later on. So I think Matt is talking about the perfect things, talking about looking at their skeleton, starting from the ground up. One might be skinny, one might not have, had the best mama, and it's in that $500 to $600 range. You guys can find a really good sheep right there. And then again, months and months and months of feed and exercise are put into them. That's what I like to emphasize, is that, when you buy an animal, it's not destined to be a 3rd place sheep or a 1st place sheep or an 8th place sheep. You have exercise and feed and a lot of different things and hard work to go into it. So, don't justify where you're going to end up on what you pay. But with that being said, there's still a pretty good estimation, a $500 to $800 sheep is still going to be a $500 to $800 sheep. But still, there's a lot of those high-priced ones that aren't as good as they actually are. What do you think, Matt?
I think for those who are, just getting started, something that we need to mention is for these things that we call show lambs, they are just that. They're show lambs. Their genetics are special. There's a lot of extra time and effort that goes into producing these things and making them what they are. And I guess, it goes without being said that these aren't grandma and papa sheep.
I think that's a great point, because a lot of times when people are asking me for help and this and that, they go, how can we save money? How can I buy a sheep that makes sale for $150? With that being said, this is a project that takes a lot of work and time, and you don't have to break the bank to have a good project. But at the same time, your point is perfect. These are show lambs, and you're representing years and years and years of genetics, hard work, and thought out plans. That comes with a price. So, if you're just getting into livestock showing, don't do it to save money or just to sell. It's way more than that. And it's also about having the experience of raising a quality animal and, realizing all the hard work that's put behind it. Not just your hard work, but the breeder's years and years and years of developing that genetic profile.
Very well stated, Zane. So we have another sheep here up on the stand, and one that we would immediately consider to be lower priced. So just studying this one off the profile, what are some things that we can immediately recognize that makes this lamb, one to be that's, maybe going to be priced less than the one that we just took a look at? Again, starting from the ground up, when we begin to study this one here, we can immediately see that the feet on this sheep, or the hooves, I should say, the size of the feet there are not as, big and massive as the one that we had, before. When we start talking about the circumference of bone and in the cannon, we'll kind of give up a little bit of that there as well. But still, the angles we feel like are relatively, you know, adequate and correct and good, you know, and as we begin to study this one about his lines, he's still balanced, you know, he's still driving uphill. And this one again, you know, still has a lot of those angles and things that we really like to see in our show lambs. Zane, what else do you see?
I see all those. This is still a really good sheep, and I think there's a lot of those things. Comparatively, that's when we kind of see where this one might not be as good as the other one. Like you said, the foot size, maybe just the overall mass. This one right here, you study his neck and the way it ties into his shoulder. This is a great example of what Matt was talking about earlier and how they tie in. If you can see, this sheep's neck almost looks like it comes out of the front of its shoulder, compared to the other lamb where it looked like it came out more the top side of that one's shoulder. So this is a good example of a sheep who's just a little bit lower in his neck attachment, still a really good lamb. We like in regards to having some pattern and some look from the side, just not quite as massive, not quite as good in his neck attachment, maybe not as perfectly level out of his hip as well.
Excellent. And as we kind of turn around here and get another look here from the rear view profile, again, just from the ground up, you can see this one is not as extremely wide in terms of his base width. You get up, you know, higher up on this lamb right here, he's not as deep in terms of his twist, but still relatively level and, you know, flat right out of that hind saddle. And you get right up over the top of this one. And you can see that we still have that desired shape that we want to see, you know, when it comes to these things being a tick more refined out of their front end and still exploding out of that rear. What else do you see, Zane?
I love your terminology there, refined on the front end and exploding out of their, you know, rear end. I think that's the great way to put it, because a lot of times we want that mass and that power, but we, you know, forget that it comes with a cost of maybe blowing out their shoulder, being too wide and ugly up front. I think that's a great way to put it. We want that chest width, we want that power, but we really want them to explode backwards. We want that width to be very progressive in a wedge type shape back to their hip. And although we still want really a lot of power to the backside of their shoulder, we want that rib. That power of the backside of their shoulder is going to come with enough chest width, and then more importantly, having that right type of rib shape out of the backside of their shoulder. So this one, although maybe not as explosive as the next one, still is wedged the right way and has that good progressive look up top that we look for in quality livestock.
And again, you know, to, you know, re-emphasize all the things that makes this project a success, wouldn't you agree that, you know, if we had this sheep on feed with an experienced feeder and the sheep that we saw earlier with an inexperienced feeder, I mean, the results when it comes to the show that matters could be very well different. Wouldn't you say so, Zane?
Could easily be switched, Matt. I totally agree. And that's why I say, you know, you can feed muscle and fat. As long as they have a foundation that you can do it and enough width and enough rib shape, you can take that lamb and exercise them and run them and do whatever else you need to do, put them on quality feed and additives, and that sheep is going to be just as massive as the other one, especially if the kid who buys the other one doesn't put them on a quality feed or doesn't put them on a very high quality exercise ration as well. So that's a good point. You know, you can take kind of a good sheep, maybe not a great sheep, and definitely beat those great ones with hard work, feed, and a great exercise program. You can feed muscle and fat, but you can't feed structure and balance.
Well stated, very well stated. So up to this point, you know, let's take some questions if there are any questions in the chat box. Do we have anything?
No, not yet.
Okay, that's completely fine.
Real quick, I was just going to mention to the attendees, if you want to, you know, hover over the bottom, there's a part where you can say like raise your hand. If you'd like to be able to ask personal or questions directly to the panelists, go ahead and raise your hand and we can unmute you.
Very good. Thank you for that, Lottie. Also, while you're in the chat box, why don't you tell us where you're watching from? We'll send you a prize when we get to figuring out how we're going to do that. Wouldn't you agree, Lottie?
Yeah, definitely. That would be great. And if you're closer to Matt, we might be able to and some goodies.
Oh yeah, we have plenty of swag and all kinds of things to give away. And I know Zane's probably got a few things hanging around his office too that certainly could be given away as well. So be sure to give us a shout in the chat box where you're watching from. Again, just really give us that feedback, because that's something that's extremely important when it comes to helping us develop these webinars and programs to best serve you all as viewers. So without any further ado, let's turn around and let's take a look at another lamb. So now this one here is something that we would consider to be at possibly the lowest price point, right, Neil? Yep, the lowest price point. So as we can begin to see with this lamb, you know, again, from the ground up, this one becomes that much more refined in terms of his feet and legs, in terms of the dimension and size. We take a look at that length of cannon. It's, you know, what I would consider relatively shorter than the other two lambs that we've seen prior. So we can indicate that this lamb's not going to grow extremely big. You know, most likely this one's best day will not be at, you know, maybe 145 pounds, maybe somewhere there in the 120 range. So, you know, just kind of, you know, seeing some of those growth indicators right off the bat. Another growth indicator, just looking right up at their head. You see how short that muzzle is on this one. That's another indicator there to say that this lamb's not going to be a very growthy or high growth or high performing individual. But, you know, again, when it comes to seeing a lamb that is, you know, correct, I feel like the angles are correct. This one still puts together a very nice silhouette. But as you can tell, you know, again, when it comes to muscle shape and things, this one does give up some, you know, side, especially from the side view, in terms of the muscle shape and pattern there. You begin to study this one about his forerib. It gets a little tighter right there as well. And again, you know, one that's, you know, sets a tick low in terms of his neck attachment, and maybe gets a tick bold in the shoulder for me as well, especially when we kind of come around here and we begin to study this one from that front 3/4 view. That particular point of the shoulder begins to, you know, poke out a little more than we'd like to see, even though this one, you know, again, has a lot of other things going for him that is correct. Zane, what else do you have to fill in for us here?
So again, I think you've talked them extremely accurate. You know, a good quality lamb that has some traits that could definitely go on and, you know, win a lot of county fairs. But compared to some of the others, just not quite as explosive, not as good in his chest. And I think something that we probably haven't talked about as much, and I kind of answered a question in the chat box, is how have lambs changed over the last 10 years? And kind of my response to that was really kind of, we've got them so exotic and so shallow and kind of pretty. That's really kind of the trend that they're going for, while also adding more bone and shag. So with that being said, you know, I kind of hinted on earlier, but we want from that top of that back to the bottom of that chest, we want them to be relatively shallow and exotic, to where they have that just kind of futuristic look up front, but again, that their flank still sits deeper and lower in them. So, you know, lambs that are going to have that really kind of exotic look up front are going to be a little bit flashier and you know, easier to grab your attention in today's show ring. You know, not to say that there's kind of a deeper lamb that has everything else good going for it, but I know a lot of shows that, you know, Matt, I know you judge a lot of shows, I judge a lot of shows, you know, that kind of exotic, shallow one that's still good enough muscle and everything, it's really kind of stands out. And I think that's something that when you're looking at when you're going to a show and kind of assessing your county fair, you know, if you have 150 lambs at your county fair and it sure enough takes a really good one to win, you're going to have something that stands out and something that grabs that judge's attention. You know, that shallowness of chest, maybe some extra bone, you know, things like that, extra skeletal quality, those are what's going to make you stand out against your contemporaries.
And speaking of things that have changed, especially in the last 20 years, let's talk about that Legwell. I mean, you know, considering that first one that we looked at, you know, looking at his Legwell and comparing it to the Legwell that we see on this lamb, I mean, what's all that about?
So the last few years, I mean, probably even since I've graduated high school and kind of moved on, Legwell is a huge, huge thing and getting it looking just right. And a lot of times it's hard work and working that legs, but it's also genetics. And Matt, you talked about it earlier, asking the breeder, you know, the genetic profile of your sheep. What buck is this one out of? What dam is this one out of? Things like that. There's more genetic propensity for wool in certain lambs than there is others. Like that first one we saw, he's going to be awfully shaggy. That's just going to help him look even better in the show ring. So with that being said, you know, a decade ago, and that was the one thing I kind of commented, if you look at the champions from, you know, 2010, 2009, they don't have that bone and they don't have that shag. Today, they definitely do, and that's something to think about when you're purchasing. A lot of people that, you know, ask me for some help, they used to show a decade ago, 2 decades ago, and they want to pick the same style of sheep. Before you get invested in this project, do a little bit of research on what's winning today in 2020 or 2019 or 2018. See the style of sheep that are winning across the country so that you can pick a project that's kind of molded from the same type of sheep as those. So you don't want to pick something that would have won 10 years ago, because right now is what we're focused on.
Very good, Zane. So as we kind of go back and view this one here from the ground up, again, this is a ewe. You know, we've kind of studied this one here. You know, her hocks and everything looks, you know, fairly adequate and acceptable to me. She's got enough in terms of her width of base. As we kind of get to study those pin bones here, come on, camera. Begin to study those pin bones. Okay, when I'm talking about pin bones, there's 2 little bones that sit right here on either side of their, you know, right above the twist. Okay, the twist is right here, but there's these pin bones. You can feel them, and they're you know, available to see in all species of livestock, whether we're talking sheep, goats, cattle, you know, and hogs as well. And anyway, that width is something that we really consider a major indicator of muscle. Now, as we begin to study this one here down her top line, come on, camera. We can now begin to study this one and see that, you know, there's still enough width out of her hip relative to the width there at the top of her blades, her shoulder blades. Now, is this something that is the end of the world? Absolutely not. This one will still drive. This one will still compete. And this one can still be developed to the best of her ability with a good feeding program and good management. Zane, what else do you have for us?
Yeah, so, you know, this is probably the lowest end sheep that we've seen, but is it still high quality? Yes. And I think that's something, although you may not buy the, you know, top 5 sheep that are at the place, or you may not buy that one that just, you know, takes your breath away. That doesn't mean that there's sheep there that aren't going to win your county fair, aren't going to win you a class at your state fair or district fair or whatever it might be. You know, good sheep is good sheep, and that always doesn't have a price tag on it. So if you're going to a smaller fair, you know, maybe say 20 head, 30 head, you don't need that first lamb to go in and win. But if you're going to maybe state fair, for instance, you're going to need something a little bit higher quality to kind of stand out. But again, good sheep, just not quite as exotic, maybe just doesn't have that progressiveness that we did see in the others. But again, not the end of the world, still good livestock.
Hey, great. Thank you, Zane. Thank you for that. With all that being said, we're going to go ahead and go back to our little mobile studio here. And we're going to, again, take the opportunity to hear some questions, if anybody has any questions.
So we do have one in the chat room for what would you look for to take to Denver?
Okay. So the first thing that I'll immediately start with when it comes to selecting a lamb for Denver is those sheep that are, you know, properly aged for Denver. They're not on the ground yet. Would you say, Zane? They're more or less a summer-born kind of a sheep.
Yeah, and it also depends on your feeding program. I know there's people that prefer older livestock. There's people that do that. But like I said earlier, you know, you can't take a short cannon, short face sheep to Denver that's born right now. if one's born right now, it's going to have to be really long and really lanky because they're going to have to, feed out for that time. So you just got to look at the specific animal and are they cut from what mold? Are they maybe earlier maturing or later maturing? And that's kind of what I do. But yeah, Matt, I'd probably agree that they're going to be probably a May or a June born, maybe a little bit later.
Right, May or June born. If they're born, right now, they're definitely going to be the type that have to be rail skinny in terms of them being green, but should absolutely be fairly immaculate in terms of their skeleton. And again, it goes back to what are your goals when you go to a show like Denver? Do you want to play in a certain breed, or do you want to go run right there with the black faces? You kind of have an idea of which classes and divisions those that the champion sheep come out of. So you'll have to, again, identify your goals to see where exactly you want to, get in where you fit in. And from there, by contacting someone like myself or Zane, even Nealon right here, and of course, plenty of others who are well qualified from around the country, they can certainly help you find the sheep to fit your needs and fit your goals.
I agree, Matt, and I think bringing up the breed point is a great deal, especially if that's your first national show. Don't try to, hop into the black faces and win it all, because that's an awfully competitive show. And that's something that, I learned growing up is, if you're first starting off, play in the breed game. There might only be 40 head of hair sheep at that show, or maybe even less, or there might only be 40 Dorsets or, something along that line. So try to play in the breed game if that's what you need. But again, if you can find a really high quality black face, go ahead. Just know that, that's an awfully tough show. And no matter what breed you're in, good livestock is that's what's going to take to kind of rise to the top.
And another thing to note for a show like Denver, and of course, many of the Texas majors, is a lot of those shows are also terminal.
Yes.
And what do we mean by terminal is once you're done showing, no matter where you've placed, if you made the premium sale, you get to hang on to them for a couple of days. And if not, they will be loaded onto a truck and they will pay you, price per pound at whatever the market value of that animal is. So that's also something to weigh in, especially if your goal is to, possibly look at, keeping that thing back for, possibly breeding purposes if it's a ewe, or if it's, again, being able to know what show you're going to, what your goals are, studying the rules. I'm certain there's some shows out there where they are limited to showing just ewes or wethers, whatever it may be. There's a lot of different rules and a lot of different things that come into play when you start to up your level and up your game in this livestock industry.
Agreed. Yeah, it's anywhere you go, you have to know what the level of competition it is. And even in my lifetime, I've seen there's so many good livestock out there, all across the board, whether it's goats, cattle, pigs, sheep. And I know, Matt, you can attest to this, from when we were kids. It's a totally different ball game. I think now there's so many good livestock across the board. So, like Matt said, find a breeder that's going to help you out. Talk to me or talk to him. Talk to your extension agent. Tune into things like this, whether it be from a bees or a breed association or things like that. Anybody can learn going and going and going. These people that win national shows, they're still learning every day about something new, about how to make their sheep any better. So, just stick your nose to the grindstone and you guys can be as competitive as you guys want to be.
Hey, great point to end on. I mean, I think I'll use that to go ahead and begin our conclusion. So, once again, when it comes to, market lamb selection, it's just one element of many that have to go right in your project in order to find success. When it comes to your, making sure that you identify your goals, having your goals set, making sure that, we have things available in terms of cash for our budgets and being able to go up and down the road. I mean, heck, for those of y'all who are local here in the area, you may come here, you may see the price of that lamb, and it may make you want to scratch your head. And something to consider is, well, if we load everybody up and we go, drive on, another, 400 plus miles and go look at some more sheep and end up, spending all that extra money and, gas, food, and hotels. I mean, are we really saving money? So some of those things we can certainly consider, especially when we start to, evaluate and select livestock, locally before we begin to branch out and, look further. So with that being said, again, we are the InterTribal Agriculture Council. For those of you who have Native American descendancy, or you descend from Native Americans, you're more than welcome to jump on board with our programs. We have a lot of things to assist you in terms of, loans to get you started, someone like myself to provide that guidance, at no added cost for, all that extra consultation. Your breeders and people who you buy from will also be, great people to help you fill that void. Will, certainly help you, provide the best guidance in terms of managing your livestock and giving our best suggestions to, where we feel like we can help you find success. And of course, giving you that added support at the show, not just during the show. And I mean, in the sale itself, we like to go out and support our clients who, purchase, livestock and they want to go show, and we'll certainly be there in the stands to, help raise the bids or even outright purchase those things. So we can make sure we give you the absolute best experience possible. And that's something I'm extremely proud of. And I know the people, lined up within our organization, fully support that as well. So with that being said, I want to bring in Neil in for a quick minute, if you want to unmute her. And, again, we just want to thank you so much. Go ahead and mute me, and I think you can hear me through her mic. We want to thank me, and then you could probably hear her.
I think you're muted.
Okay. Good. Okay, so Neelan, we want to thank you so much for, allowing us to come onto your place, look through some sheep. We certainly hope this was well worth your time to help, get you some views and bring folks out your way. So why don't you just fill people in on where they can buy your sheep, or how can they contact you to come look at sheep?
Yeah, most definitely. I'm glad y'all came out. I think this was really helpful for the community. I'm on Facebook, Doyle Club Lambs or Neil in Doyle. Either way, there's 2 messengers set up there. You can contact me anyway through that. You can also get a hold of Matt. Matt knows how to get a hold of me. Also, you can just call me. My number is 505-947-5555. We're located here in Bloomfield, and we'll work with you to the best of our abilities to get you out here and get a good sheep in your hands.
Hey, thank you, Neelan. We appreciate you for your time. Again, we're right up on the hour. Mute her, please. Okay, so anyway, we're right up on the hour, and with that being said, unless there are any further questions, I'll be here for at least another, good 15 minutes to a half hour. If you have any questions about the lambs, you can also contact me. I'll be here for a little bit. My phone number is 505-801-4426. Call and text. And my email address is Matthew, MATTHEW, at Indian, INDIAN, ag.org. Once again, that is Matthew at indianag.org. Hey, thank you all so much for tuning in. We'll see you next time on our IAC webinar series. Have a great day.